I think I didn't do anything wrong, just followed my feelings for once. But when the courier handed me those divorce papers, I realized my husband had never been the fool. I was. Now everyone sees the truth, and I don't know how to fix it. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The kitchen tiles felt cold under my bare feet as I scrolled through my phone, a smile tugging at my lips. Mark's latest text was sweet, nothing inappropriate, just catching up like old friends do. When Elliot walked in, his accountant's precision evident in his perfectly pressed shirt. Despite the early hour, I quickly switched to checking the weather. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying that distant tone I'd grown used to over the past few months. "Morning." I poured coffee into his favorite mug, the one Ava had painted for Father's Day. "You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep." His gray eyes studied me for a moment. "You seemed restless too. Your phone was lighting up pretty late last night." Heat crept up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "Just Sarah from work. You know how she gets about project deadlines." The lie came easily. Too easily, perhaps. Elliot nodded slowly, but something flickered across his face. Suspicion? Hurt? I couldn't tell anymore. We'd grown so distant, like roommates sharing space rather than spouses sharing a life. "Elliot, you're being paranoid," I said, forcing a laugh. "I'm allowed to have friends, aren't I?" "Of course." But his tone suggested otherwise. Later that morning, my mother Miriam called while I organized Ava's school supplies. Her voice carried that familiar note of concern mixed with enabling that I'd grown accustomed to. "Darling, you sound stressed. Is everything all right with you and Elliot?" I found myself confiding more than I'd intended. "He's just distant, Mom. Cold. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." "You deserve happiness, Ottilie. You've always been such a giving person. Maybe Elliot just doesn't appreciate what he has." Her words were a balm to my frustration. Someone understood. Someone saw that I wasn't the problem here. That evening, as Elliot worked late in his home office, my phone buzzed again. Mark's name lit up the screen, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement, something I hadn't felt with my own husband in years. Thinking about our coffee yesterday made me remember why I fell for you in college. You haven't changed a bit. I was crafting a response when Elliot appeared in the doorway, his presence startling me. "Who's texting so late?" he asked quietly. "Just an old friend." I set the phone face down, but not before I caught the way his jaw tightened. "Which old friend? Does it matter?" The defensiveness in my voice surprised even me. "God, Elliot, you're acting like I'm having an affair or something." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and loaded. Elliot's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardening, like a door closing. "I'm going to bed," he said simply. As I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, I told myself I was right to be annoyed. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Mark was just a friend, a memory from a simpler time. If Elliot couldn't handle me having a social life, that was his problem. But later, lying in our bed with Elliot's back turned to me, I couldn't shake the image of his face when I'd mentioned the word affair. The look hadn't been anger or jealousy. It had been something worse. It had been resignation. The office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, but I felt lighter than I had in months. My lunch with Mark on Friday had been perfect. Easy conversation, shared laughter, the kind of connection I'd forgotten existed. When my colleague Jenny approached my desk with that particular expression women get when they're about to share gossip, I was still riding that high. "So," Jenny said, perching on the edge of my desk. "Interesting weekend?" "The usual. Family time, errands. Why?" "Oh, no reason. It's just that Claire from accounting thought she saw you at that new bistro downtown Friday afternoon. with a very handsome man who definitely wasn't Elliot. My fingers paused over my keyboard. Claire needs to mind her own business. So it wasn't you? I forced a laugh. Even if it was, am I not allowed to have lunch with friends? Honestly, the gossip mill in this place is ridiculous. But Jenny's knowing smile suggested she wasn't buying it. As she walked away, I felt the first prickle of unease. Still, I pushed it down. I had nothing to hide. Mark and I were just friends reconnecting. That evening at dinner, the tension in our house was thick enough to cut. Ava chattered about her day at school while Elliot and I maintained polite conversation about schedules and household matters. We'd become experts at performing normalcy for our daughter's sake. "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy talk to each other anymore?" Ava asked suddenly, her 7-year-old directness cutting through our pretense. Elliot's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You used to laugh together. Now you just talk about boring stuff like groceries and who's picking me up from school." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Mommy and Daddy are just tired, baby. Adults get tired sometimes. But Grandma Pamela says—" "What does Grandma Pamela say?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. Ava's eyes widened at my tone. Elliot set down his fork and gave me a warning look. "She says grown-ups sometimes forget how to be nice to each other." Ava finished quietly. Later, after Ava was in bed, I confronted Elliot. "Your mother is discussing our marriage with our 7-year-old? My mother is concerned, as am I." His voice was measured, controlled. "Ottilie, I think we should consider counseling." I stared at him. "Counseling for what?" "For us, for our marriage. We're barely communicating, you're always on your phone, and now Ava is noticing the tension." "So this is my fault?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." I crossed my arms. Maybe the problem isn't that I'm on my phone too much. Maybe it's that my husband has become a boring, emotionally stunted man who thinks the height of excitement is balancing a checkbook. The words hit their mark. I saw Elliot flinch, saw the hurt flash across his features before he carefully composed himself again. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, the offer for counseling stands if you change your mind." That night, I lay awake feeling vindicated and guilty in equal measure. I'd been harsh, but hadn't I just been honest? When had Elliot become so safe, so predictable? Mark made me feel alive again, made me remember who I used to be before I became just another suburban wife and mother. The next day brought more whispered conversations at work and sidelong glances. By Thursday, even Sarah was acting strange, cutting our usual coffee break short with a mumbled excuse about deadlines. It was Jonas, Elliot's brother, who delivered the real blow. He called that evening while I was helping Ava with homework. "Is Elliot there?" His usual warm tone was notably absent. "He's at his Thursday night accounting class. Can I take a message?" A pause. "Actually, Ottilie, maybe we should talk." My stomach clenched. "About what?" "About whatever's going on with you and my brother, and about the guy you've been seen around town with." "Jonas, I don't know what you think you know. I know my brother is a good man who doesn't deserve to be humiliated. And I know that small towns talk, Ottilie. Whatever you're doing, people are noticing." After he hung up, I sat staring at the phone. The walls felt like they were closing in. Everyone was overreacting, making something out of nothing. Mark and I were friends. Yes, there was attraction. I wasn't blind. But we hadn't crossed any lines. Not yet. When Elliot came home that night, he was different, quieter, more purposeful. I found him in his office, laptop open, papers spread across his desk. "How was class?" I asked from the doorway. "Fine." He didn't look up from his screen. "What are you working on?" "Just organizing some things." His fingers moved across the keyboard with deliberate precision. "Financial records mostly, making sure everything is properly documented." Something in his tone made my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on why. It was only later, as I was getting ready for bed, that I realized what had been different about his demeanor. Elliot had stopped looking hurt. He'd stopped looking angry. He'd started looking determined. The dinner party had been my idea, a chance to prove to everyone that our marriage was fine, that the whispers and sideways glances were just small-town nonsense. I'd invited 3 couples from our social circle, prepared Elliot's favorite meal, and even bought a new dress that made me feel confident and attractive. What I hadn't counted on was how the evening would unravel. It started innocently enough. Wine flowed, conversation was pleasant, and for the first hour, I felt like we were successfully playing the part of a happy couple. Then Mark texted. I'd stepped into the kitchen to check on dessert when my phone buzzed. His message was simple, but loaded with meaning. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. When can I see you again? Yesterday. Our first real kiss, stolen in the parking lot of his apartment complex, after what was supposed to be just coffee. The memory sent warmth spreading through my chest, and I was smiling as I typed back when I realized I wasn't alone. Mommy? Ava stood in the kitchen doorway, her tablet in her hands. Who are you texting? You look happy. I quickly closed the phone. Just work stuff, baby. What are you doing down here? You should be in bed. I wanted to show you the video I made of the dinner party. I was practicing with the camera app. My blood ran cold. What video? Before she could answer, voices from the dining room grew louder. I could hear Pamela's sharp tone cutting through the general chatter. Frankly irresponsible behavior. Some people seem to forget they have families to consider. I rushed back to the dining room, Ava trailing behind me, to find all eyes on me. The conversation had clearly been about me. Is there a problem? I asked, forcing a smile. Pamela, never one to mince words, set down her wineglass with a sharp clink. Ottilie, dear, perhaps you could explain why half the town has seen you having intimate lunches with Mark Linton? The room fell silent. I felt my face burn as 6 pairs of eyes stared at me expectantly. Elliot sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. I don't know what you mean by intimate, I said carefully. Mark is an old friend. We've had coffee a few times. Coffee? Pamela's voice dripped skepticism. Is that what they're calling it now? Pamela, please, my mother interjected, her voice strained. I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation. Of course there is, I said, my voice rising slightly. The problem is that my husband has become so emotionally stunted that he can't handle me having friends, and apparently his family is just as paranoid. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I saw our guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Sarah, who'd been quiet all evening, suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. Emotionally stunted, Elliot repeated quietly. It wasn't a question. Well, aren't you? When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you showed any interest in me as a person, rather than just the woman who manages your household? Ottilie, my mother whispered, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, let's discuss it now, since everyone seems to have opinions about my marriage. I turned to our guests. Did you know my husband thinks I need therapy because I have friends? Did you know he monitors my phone like I'm a teenager? That's enough. Elliot's voice cut through my rant with quiet authority. He stood slowly, his napkin placed carefully beside his plate. I think our guests would prefer not to be subjected to our personal issues. Our issues? You mean your issues? Something shifted in Elliot's face then. The hurt I'd grown accustomed to seeing was replaced by something harder, more resolved. Yes, he said simply, my issues. The dinner party ended quickly after that, guests making polite excuses and hurried exits. Only Pamela lingered, her disapproval radiating from every pore. Elliot, dear, perhaps you and Ava should spend the weekend at our house, she said. not bothering to lower her voice. Give everyone some space to think. That's not necessary, I protested. I think it's a good idea, Elliot said quietly. After they left, Pamela, Elliot, and Ava with an overnight bag, I found myself alone in our house for the first time in years. The silence was deafening. I was cleaning up the disaster of the dinner party when I found Ava's tablet on the kitchen counter. Curious about the video she'd mentioned, I opened the camera app. What I saw made my stomach drop. There I was, clear as day, smiling at my phone in the kitchen. The audio had picked up my side of a phone conversation I'd forgotten about, a call with Mark from earlier in the week. I know, I miss you too. No, Elliot doesn't suspect anything. He wouldn't dare confront me even if he did. The video was 12 minutes long. 12 minutes of me talking to Mark, laughing, saying things that no married woman should say about another man while her husband entertained guests in the next room. 12 minutes of evidence that I'd just handed my 7-year-old daughter. My hands shook as I deleted the video, but the damage was done. If I could recover it from a child's tablet, anyone could. And if Ava had heard any of it, if she'd understood even a fraction of what I'd said. I called Elliot's phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. When I finally went to bed that night, I found something that chilled me to the bone. On Elliot's nightstand was a manila folder labeled documentation in his precise handwriting. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, and what looked like a timeline of dates and times. All the dates I'd met with Mark. As I stared at the evidence of my husband's quiet, methodical preparation, I realized that while I'd been playing games and justifying my actions, Elliot had been building a case. The fool in this marriage wasn't him. It was me. The first sign that my world was crumbling came on a Tuesday morning when my debit card was declined at the coffee shop. Embarrassed, I mumbled something about bank errors to the barista and used cash instead, but a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. By the time I got to work, I'd discovered that Elliot had moved half of our joint savings into an account with only his name on it. When I called him, his response was calm and devastatingly simple. I'm protecting our family's assets while we work through our issues. Our issues? Elliot, you can't just... I can, actually. I spoke with a lawyer yesterday. Everything I've done is perfectly legal. A lawyer. The word hit me like a physical blow. You went to a lawyer? Without talking to me? We're past talking, Ottilie. The line went dead. At work, the atmosphere had shifted from gossip to outright avoidance. Sarah, who'd been my closest friend in the office, could barely meet my eyes during our morning meeting. When I tried to corner her at lunch, her discomfort was palpable. Sarah, what's going on? Everyone's acting like I have the plague. She fidgeted with her sandwich wrapper. Ottilie, maybe you should just keep a lower profile for a while. What does that mean? It means people are talking, and some of what they're saying... She trailed off, shaking her head. What are they saying? That you've been having an affair, that your husband found out, that you humiliated him at your own dinner party. Her words came out in a rush. Look, I don't want to get involved in personal drama, okay? I have my own job to worry about. The isolation was suffocating. Even my usual allies were distancing themselves. When I tried to reach out to other friends, their responses were polite but cool. The social media posts I'd made painting myself as the victim of an emotionally distant husband weren't generating the sympathy I'd expected. Instead, people seemed to be reading between the lines. That evening, I decided to take control of the narrative. If everyone wanted to make assumptions, I'd give them the truth, my version of it. I crafted a Facebook post carefully, positioning myself as a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking connection, and finding herself punished for it. I wrote about emotional neglect, about feeling invisible in my own home, about the courage it took to reach out for friendship and support. The response was swift and brutal. Within an hour, I had 3 comments, all from people I'd considered friends. The kindest one simply said, "There are 2 sides to every story. The others were less diplomatic. Then Pamela commented, "Some people will do anything to avoid taking responsibility for their choices." The post became a battleground. People I barely knew were weighing in, and the consensus was clear. I was not the victim in this story. I deleted the post, but screenshots had already been taken. My humiliation was preserved for posterity. That night, alone in our house, Elliot and Ava were still staying with his parents. I called Mark. I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the monster everyone was making me out to be. "This is all getting a bit intense," he said, after I'd poured out my frustrations. "Maybe we should cool things off for a while." "Cool things off? Mark, I'm losing everything here." "And I'm sorry about that, but I didn't sign up for a messy divorce. I just wanted to reconnect with an old friend. Have some fun." "Have some fun?" The words felt like a slap. "Is that all this was to you?" "Ottilie, let's be honest. We both knew this wasn't going anywhere serious. You're married with a kid. I'm just getting out of my own divorce. We were just enjoying each other's company." After he hung up, I sat in my empty house and faced a terrible truth. I had destroyed my marriage for a man who saw me as nothing more than a temporary distraction. The next morning brought the final blow. A courier arrived at my door with an envelope marked, "Legal documents, immediate attention required." Inside were divorce papers. Elliot wasn't just protecting assets, he was ending our marriage, and according to the documents, he was seeking primary custody of Ava, citing adultery and emotional instability as grounds. My hands shook as I read through the legal language. Everything was there: dates, times, witness statements. Even the video from Ava's tablet, somehow recovered and submitted as evidence. Elliot hadn't been the distant, emotionally stunted man I'd painted him as. He'd been a husband watching his marriage crumble, quietly and methodically documenting every betrayal, while I'd been too caught up in my own justifications to notice. I called him immediately. "Elliot, please, we need to talk. This doesn't have to be the end." "Yes, it does." His voice was steady, final. "I've given you months to choose our family. You chose Mark instead. I choose you now. I choose us. It's too late, Ottilie. I won't spend another day wondering if my wife is coming home to me or to her phone. Ava won't grow up thinking this is what marriage looks like. You can't take my daughter from me. I'm not taking her from you. I'm protecting her from the chaos you've created. You'll have visitation rights, but they'll be supervised until you can prove you're stable." Supervised visitation. The words were a knife to my heart. As I sat surrounded by legal documents that spelled out the end of my marriage, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a marriage, but a family. Not just my reputation, but my daughter's respect. And for what? For a man who'd just told me I was fun while my world burned down around me. The fool in this story wasn't Elliot. It had always been me. The law office of Harrison and Lee smelled like leather and disappointment. I sat across from Janet Harrison, a family lawyer whose reputation for aggressive representation had cost me half of my remaining savings just to secure a consultation. "Mrs. Vane," she said, reviewing the documents Elliot's lawyer had filed, "I have to be honest with you. This is going to be an uphill battle. But surely I have rights as Ava's mother." "Of course you do. But your husband's legal team has built a very thorough case. They have documented evidence of the affair, including recorded conversations, financial records showing unexplained expenses, and witness statements from multiple sources." She spread the papers across her desk like a tarot reading of my failures. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals on days I'd met Mark. Credit card receipts from restaurants where we'd had lunch. Even my work computer's browsing history, showing personal emails sent during business hours. "How did they get all this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your husband had every right to access joint financial records. As for the rest," she shrugged. "He was methodical, patient. He built this case over months while you were presumably unaware of his suspicions. The word methodical hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been calling Elliot boring and predictable, he'd been systematically documenting my betrayal with the same careful attention he brought to his accounting work. "What about the supervised visitation?" I asked. "That's temporary, right?" Janet's expression was grim. "That depends on you. The court will want to see evidence of stability, responsibility, and genuine remorse. Your social media posts claiming to be the victim of emotional abuse haven't helped your case." Over the following weeks, the true scope of my isolation became clear. Friends I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Parents at Ava's school whispered when I passed. Even the grocery store felt hostile, filled with eyes that judged and voices that fell silent when I approached. My mother tried to help, bless her. She called Elliot directly, pleading for reconciliation. "Miriam," I heard him say during one of these calls. His voice was calm but firm. "I respect you, and I know you love Ottilie, but she made her choices. Now I'm making mine." "She's just going through a phase," my mother insisted. "All marriages have rough patches." This wasn't a rough patch. This was a betrayal. And not just of me, of Ava too. The mention of our daughter was what finally broke through my mother's denial. When she hung up, she looked at me with something I'd never seen before: disappointment. "Ottilie," she said quietly, "what have you done?" The supervised visitation sessions were torture. Every Saturday I met Ava at a family services center where a social worker monitored our interactions. My 7-year-old daughter, who used to run into my arms, now sat across from me at a small table, polite but distant. "How's school, baby?" I asked during our third session. "Fine." She colored in a picture of a house, a simple drawing with stick figures that clearly represented a family. There were only 2 figures, a tall one labeled Daddy and a small one labeled Me. "Where's Mommy in your picture?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Ava looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Mommy doesn't live with us anymore." The social worker, Mrs. Chen, took notes. Everything was being documented, evaluated, judged. "Ava," I said carefully, "you know Mommy loves you very much, right? And I'm working hard to make things better so we can spend more time together. Daddy says you made choices that hurt our family." The words came out matter-of-factly, without malice, which somehow made them worse. "Daddy's right," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Mommy made mistakes, big mistakes, but I want to fix them." "Can you fix them?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Mrs. Chen's pen paused over her notepad. Even my 7-year-old daughter could see what I was only beginning to understand. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in November. As the date approached, I became increasingly desperate. I tried reaching out to Mark, hoping he might provide some kind of character reference, but his number had been disconnected. A mutual friend told me he'd moved to another state for a fresh start. I'd lost my marriage, my daughter, my reputation, and my dignity for a man who'd vanished the moment things got complicated. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I drove past our house, Elliot's house now, and saw lights on in the kitchen. Through the window, I could see Elliot helping Ava with homework, the 2 of them bent over books at the table where we used to eat dinner as a family. They looked peaceful, complete. I realized then that my presence wouldn't improve that scene. I would only disrupt it, bring chaos and uncertainty back into their carefully rebuilt stability. For the first time in months, I began to understand what I'd really lost. Not just a marriage, but a family. Not just a husband, but a partner who'd loved me enough to try to save what we had, even as I was destroying it. And the most devastating part? I'd convinced myself I was the victim while I was actually the villain in my own story. The hearing was tomorrow. Soon, a judge would decide how much of my daughter's life I'd be allowed to share. As I sat in my car outside the home I'd lost, I finally began to understand the true cost of my choices. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, its high ceilings and marble floors echoing with the footsteps of people whose lives were being decided by strangers in black robes. I sat at the defendant's table with Janet Harrison, watching Elliot and his lawyer organize their files with military precision. Judge Patricia Winters was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd reviewed all the evidence, heard testimony from character witnesses, and studied the social worker's reports on my supervised visits with Ava. "This court has carefully considered all evidence presented," she began, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "In the matter of custody, the court finds that the best interests of the minor child, Ava Vane, are served by awarding primary physical custody to the father, Elliot Vane." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd known they were coming. "The mother, Ottilie Vane, shall have supervised visitation every other weekend, with the possibility of unsupervised visits, pending successful completion of counseling and demonstration of emotional stability over a period of no less than 6 months. 6 months. Half a year to prove I deserve to be alone with my own daughter. Regarding financial matters," the judge continued, "the court awards Mr. Vane the family home and primary assets, with Mrs. Vane receiving spousal support for a period of 2 years, contingent upon her seeking employment and maintaining stable housing. 2 years to rebuild my entire life." When it was over, I watched Elliot shake hands with his lawyer, accept congratulations from his mother and brother. He'd won completely, but there was no triumph in his expression, only relief and a bone-deep weariness that I'd put there. As people filed out of the courtroom, I found myself alone with my thoughts and my failures. Janet had already left, her job done, her bill paid. The spectators, mostly Elliot's family and friends, avoided eye contact as they passed. I was gathering my purse when I felt a presence beside me. Elliot stood there, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Ottilie," he said quietly. "Congratulations," I managed. "You got everything you wanted." "I got what Ava needed," he corrected. "There's a difference." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history pressing down between us. "For what it's worth," I said, "I know I destroyed everything. I know this is my fault." He nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." The simple acknowledgement hurt more than anger would have. Will you help Ava understand, when she's older?" "I'll tell her the truth," he said. "That her mother made choices that hurt our family, but that you love her. That people can make terrible mistakes and still be worthy of forgiveness if they're willing to do the work to earn it." "And am I worthy of forgiveness?" Elliot was quiet for a long moment. "That's not up to me anymore, Ottilie. That's between you and Ava, and you and yourself." He walked away then, his footsteps echoing in the empty courtroom. I watched him go. This man I'd once loved, then taken for granted, then betrayed, and finally lost, and felt the full weight of what I'd thrown away. That evening, in my small studio apartment across town, I sat with my laptop open to social media. The family photo Jonas had posted was still there. Elliot, Ava, and Pamela at some family gathering, all of them smiling. They looked like what they were, a family that had survived trauma and found peace. I wasn't in the picture, of course. I'd removed myself from their story through my own choices. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Mark. Maybe he'd realized what we'd lost, maybe. But it was just a spam message about car insurance. Mark was gone, disappeared into whatever new life he'd built for himself. I'd been a temporary diversion, a midlife crisis he'd walked away from without a backward glance. While I'd lost everything, he'd lost nothing. I opened my laptop and began typing, not a social media post this time, but a letter. A letter to Ava that I might give her someday, when she was old enough to understand. A letter that began with the words I should have said months ago. I was wrong. I am sorry. I love you. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, in the house that used to be ours, Elliot was probably tucking Ava into bed, reading her a story, being the parent she deserved. I'd told myself I was just following my feelings, just seeking happiness I deserved. But feelings without wisdom are just impulses, and happiness built on someone else's pain isn't happiness at all. It's selfishness wearing a prettier mask. The divorce was final. The custody arrangement was set. My reputation was in ruins, my friendships were over, and my family was broken. But for the first time in months, I wasn't making excuses. I was finally, devastatingly, completely honest with myself. I'd said my ex was just a memory, then invited that memory into my bed. In doing so, I'd turned my marriage into a memory too. And memories, unlike marriages, can't be rebuilt. All I could do now was try to become someone worthy of my daughter's love again. Someone who could look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back. It would take time. It would take work. It would take a humility I'd never possessed before. But it was the only path forward I had left. As I closed my laptop and prepared for bed in my small, quiet apartment, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a text message. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for validation from someone else. I was alone with myself, and that was exactly where I needed to be. The courier had delivered those divorce papers months ago, but I was only now beginning to understand what they really meant. Not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of whatever came next. Whether that would be redemption or just consequence remained to be seen. But at least now, finally, I was ready to find out. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.